This story is related to the ancient curse of the Whispering Woods and the forgotten cremation ground hidden within its heart. The summer of 2024 was meant to be a season of freedom for five college friends: Arjun, Rohan, Kabir, Vikram, and Sameer. Seeking an escape from the stifling heat of the city, they decided to trek into the deep, unmapped forests of the Western Ghats. They were looking for adventure, a place where no cellular signal could reach, and where the air was thick with the scent of pine and mystery. However, the forest they chose was known to the locals as the Sleeping Maw, a place where even the sunlight seemed to lose its warmth. The deeper they ventured, the more the forest changed. The vibrant green turned into a sickly pale grey, and the cheerful chirping of birds was replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. By the third evening, they realized they were hopelessly lost. Their GPS devices flickered and died, and their compass needles spun aimlessly. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple, they stumbled upon a clearing that was not marked on any map. In the center of the clearing lay an ancient shamshan, a cremation ground. It was unlike any they had ever seen. There were no modern pyres, only circles of blackened stones and half-charred logs that looked centuries old. The ground was covered in a fine white ash that felt unnaturally cold to the touch. In the center stood a gnarled banyan tree, its hanging roots draped with rusted iron chains and tattered red clothes, swaying even though there was no wind. "We shouldn't stay here," Sameer whispered, his voice trembling. "This place feels hungry." "It's just an old ritual site, Sameer," Vikram laughed, though his eyes darted nervously around the perimeter. "We'll pitch our tents on the edge of the clearing. It's better than sleeping in the thick brush where the leopards are." Against their better judgment, they set up camp. As night fell, the air grew frigid. They lit a small fire, but the flames were strange. They burned with a low blue hue and cast long distorted shadows that didn't seem to match the movements of the boys. At exactly midnight, the atmosphere shifted. The silence was broken by the sound that made their blood run cold. The rhythmic ringing of a heavy iron bell. Clang, clang, clang. It came from the banyan tree. Rohan, the most curious of the group, walked toward the tree with his flashlight. The beam of light hit the hanging roots and he froze. The iron chains weren't just hanging, they were vibrating, and the red clothes were dripping with a thick, dark liquid that looked suspiciously like fresh blood. Suddenly, Kabir let out a strangled gasp. He was staring at the ash-covered ground. From beneath the pale white dust, hundreds of pale skeletal fingers began to emerge. They weren't attacking yet, they were simply reaching upwards as if trying to catch the moonlight. "Look at the pyres," Arjun shouted. The circles of stone were now glowing with an ethereal green fire. Figures began to manifest within the flames, shadowy, translucent forms of people who had been cremated there over the last 1,000 years. But they weren't peaceful spirits. Their faces were twisted in eternal agony, their mouths wide open in silent screams. "Run!" Vikram yelled. But as they turned to flee, they realized the forest had closed in around them. The trees had moved, their branches weaving together to form a wall of thorns and wood. They were trapped inside the cremation ground. Sameer was the first to fall. An invisible force tripped him, and as he hit the ground, the white ash began to swarm over him like a living carpet of insects. He screamed as the ash entered his mouth, his nose, and his eyes. Within seconds, his body was being pulled downward into the earth. Arjun tried to grab his hand, but Samir's skin felt like burning embers. With a final, desperate cry, Samir vanished beneath the surface, leaving behind only his trekking boot. The remaining four huddled together near the dying blue fire. The shadowy figures from the pyres began to drift towards them. They weren't walking, they were gliding, their feet never touching the ash. One figure, a tall man with a charred face and eyes like glowing coals, stepped forward. He held a rusted ritual blade in his skeletal hand. "You have disturbed the eternal pyre," the spirit's voice echoed directly inside their skulls. "The ash demands new life to stay warm." Rohan panicked and tried to hack through the wall of branches with his machete, but the wood bled a black, foul-smelling sap that hissed as it touched his skin. The branches wrapped around his waist, pulling him into the dark foliage. His screams echoed for a long time before ending with a sickening crunch. Now only Arjun, Kabir and Vikram remained. The temperature dropped so low that their breath turned into ice crystals. Kabir noticed that his own shadow was no longer attached to his feet. His shadow was standing upright, moving independently, and it was holding a spectral rope. Before Kabir could react, his own shadow lunged at him, wrapping the shadow rope around his neck. Kabir collapsed, his eyes bulging as he was strangled by his own darkness.
Arjun and Vikram were paralyzed with terror. They realized that the Shamshan was not just a graveyard, but a gateway to a realm of perpetual suffering. The banyan tree began to glow with a sickly red light, and the iron chains started to lash out like whips. "The final sacrifice," the charred spirit whispered. Vikram, driven by a sudden madness, grabbed a charred log from the ritual circle and tried to strike the spirit, but his hand passed right through the ghost. The spirit touched Vikram's chest, and instantly Vikram's clothes ignited in blue flames. He didn't burn like a normal human. His flesh turned into grey ash while he was still standing, his bones glowing white hot until he collapsed into a pile of dust. Arjun was the last one left. He fell to his knees, praying for mercy. The spirits surrounded him, their cold breath smelling of death and ancient smoke. The charred man leaned in close, his hollow eyes staring into Arjun's soul. "Go," the spirit hissed. "Go and tell the world that the sleeping maw is awake. But know this, the ash is now in your blood. You belong to us." Arjun felt a searing pain in his veins, as if liquid lead were being poured through them. He didn't know how, but the wall of branches opened. He ran blindly through the forest, his lungs burning, his mind fractured. He didn't stop until he reached the main road at dawn, where a passing truck driver found him collapsed and babbling incoherently. When the authorities eventually searched the area, they found no trace of the cremation ground, no tents, and no signs of his four friends. The forest was lush and green, with no grey ash or blue fire. They dismissed Arjun's story as a drug-induced hallucination or a mental breakdown caused by the heat. However, Arjun knew the truth. Every night, when he closes his eyes, he hears the ringing of the iron bell. And when he looks in the mirror, he sees that his eyes are slowly turning the color of grey ash.
Most terrifying of all, his skin has started to feel unnaturally cold, and whenever he walks past a fireplace, the flames turn a flickering, ghostly blue. He escaped the forest, but the Shamshan never let him go. He is a living pyre, waiting for the day the ash finally consumes him from the inside out. The summer vacation was over, but for Arjun, the nightmare had just become eternal.